Nebraska fans, you got a quarterback for 2022. Welcome into the Voice of College Football Huskers. We talk Nebraska football here every day with you, so please join the best discussion, debate, and analysis right here at the Voice of College Football. We got Zach Reeder on the line from Fifth Quarter College Football to help us talk Casey Thompson coming from Texas. He had hit the transfer portal a few weeks ago, now makes his decision to come to Nebraska. So, Zach, how's that strike you?
I mean, it's a good sign. I think all Husker fans should be pretty thrilled about having a guy, like you mentioned, he's a guy that he led the Big 12 in TD passes. He's extremely talented, probably one of the more talented quarterbacks in the country. I mean, there's obviously sometimes he has some decision-making errors, so there's going to be some flaws in a guy in the transfer portal. But at the same time, yeah, you're getting a guy who's uber athletic, one of the stronger arms in college football. It just comes down to decision making and reads, and I think that's something you get in the right system. That's where you can flourish, and hopefully limit some of those mistakes and make yourself a really good college quarterback.
So I had heard a lot about Casey Thompson when he was recruited and then signed at Texas, that he was a top flight. I haven't looked up the recruiting rankings recently, but he was a top 5 quarterback in the country, something in that range. And the first time I saw him play was at the end of the 2020 season. Sam Ehlinger left the Alamo Bowl against Colorado, and Casey Thompson stepped in, and I was like super impressed. Like, he was navigating the pocket and throwing from different arm angles and throwing not the type passes that you see the typical college quarterback throw in terms of tight windows, anticipating receivers, and I didn't want to go too crazy over it. It was Colorado, but just forget the opponent, just in terms of anticipating throws and throwing NFL type passes into tight windows. And, when you get that shot from behind the quarterback that they show from up above, and you can get a feel for where was the defender and where was the receiver when the quarterback's just making his decision. And sometimes it's like crazy. You're thinking, how in the world did they figure out that the linebacker was going to clear and that was going to happen and this was going to happen? And he was making those kind of throws. And again, I didn't want to go crazy because it was like 10 passes. He tore them up like 8 for 10, but he threw 6 touchdown passes that year with no picks. And then he comes back this season and actually lost the job out of the gate to Hudson Card, another stud recruit. And so they battled it out down to the end, and Steve Sarkisian went with Card. And then he didn't play well. Couple games into it, Casey Thompson takes it back over. And as you mentioned, he then throws 24 touchdown passes and leads the Big 12.
Yeah, I think they, when I was reading about the Card thing, I think they really went to Card for strictly decision making. Having a guy like Bijan Robinson in the backfield, they went to a guy who would make less mistakes, and they thought Card would do that. But then there wasn't enough risk, and there wasn't enough of the athleticism that fit that offense. And you saw the offense kind of take the next step once they went back to Thompson after there's a little bit of an injury and Card struggled. But, you turn on games like the KU game and Oklahoma game, and you see those ridiculous stats he had. But the game that, kind of caught my eye from this year when I went back and I was watching some of the games was the Baylor-Texas game. We all know Baylor, top 10 defense in the country, really good at what they do. I think he threw for about 270 and 2 touchdowns in that game. He looked really good. Like you mentioned, the anticipation is kind of that thing that separates a college quarterback from a future NFL quarterback. He has that. He makes some mistakes, but he's pretty confident in what he's doing, and I think that's something that, Nebraska fans will take at this point. Something with Martinez you didn't have all the time. It seemed like he was a little bit hesitant to make some of those throws and anticipate some of those tight throwing windows. And I think you're going to have that. I think you have a guy that doesn't lack any confidence in Casey Thompson. And the athleticism is going to be there too. 6'1", 190. He's a little bit smaller in terms of weight, which I think is going to help him, and why you see that quickness and that ability to maneuver in the pocket. That's really something that makes him stand out.
Appreciate everybody jumping online here. We got Casey Thompson in the fold at Nebraska, coming in from Texas, one of the top recruits in the country in the 2020 class to Texas. We'll see what you guys have online here. Folks are fired up. Juan, I really wanted Caleb, but he's talented too. Yeah, Caleb Williams obviously caught tons of people's attention, and we get that. Appreciate you being here live for the first time there, USMC Sully. And certainly, if you guys have any specific comments or questions, let us know. Otherwise, it's been a pretty quiet, silent off season for the Huskers so far. They still have to deal with a coaching staff, a lot of moves to be made.
Yeah, they get the offensive line coach. I think the biggest signing was, getting Mickey Joseph as the wide receivers coach. They're working on, I've seen tweets and stuff. It's sources, and somebody went and looked up the University of Nebraska directory. Trey Palmer, former 4-star LSU wide receiver. He's apparently in the directory. I don't want to speculate because I know how those things work, but he's in the directory. So we'll see if he joins in at Nebraska. That could be another huge guy with a lot of speed to join. You got DeColdis Crawford. There's a lot of guys coming in, but I think Nebraska, the reason why a lot of people think they were kind of quiet is because they've went after O-line, special teams, the things that plagued them so much over the last couple of years. They're trying to fix up those because I think, most people that watch Nebraska know that the skill position players really aren't the problem. It's just, can you clean up the offensive line, get rid of all the penalties? Can you clean up special teams that costed you 4 games this year, 5 games at least? So I think that's why Nebraska went after those. So I really like what they did. And it seems like now they're kind of just waiting for the transfer portal to kind of figure itself out. And then they're jumping in and getting some guys right now. There's still a ton left in the transfer portal, as you very well know.
Yes, there are. It's amazing how many people are in the transfer portal. And yeah, it's impossible. We cannot evaluate. I was just going to ask you a question about evaluating the offense. We will only be able to do it to a certain extent. Nothing close to what we were able to do 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and before that, where we were like, okay, well, these guys need to make their NFL draft decisions. We'll find out January 15th. And after that, we know what the team is. The transfer portal has turned things upside down. But based on at least who you think is going to stick around, that you're happy to see around, how do you think this with obviously Samori Toure moving on to the NFL, how do you think the weapons line up for him? What do you like? What don't you like?
Yeah, I'm extremely interested to see what happens at the running back position. I know they're really high on Gabe Ervin, guy who started as a true freshman at Nebraska. He gets a knee injury. He's out for the season. You don't get to see him play. The rest of the guys, you saw glimpses in Ramir Johnson, but he's not a huge guy, so you need kind of a more consistent guy to have at the running back position. So I'm interested to see what they have there because they really haven't been big on the portal. I know they got the youngster freshman guy from Minnesota, but maybe they go into the portal here late. I know there's still big names out there. I know Jay Ducker's a name that Nebraska Twitter's been throwing around because of his ties to Nebraska, a Bellevue West product in high school. So we'll see if that pans out for Nebraska. But, I don't know about the running back position. I think Irvin's probably the leader of that, but there's just a lot of youth there. But the wide receiver position, I'm intrigued by. I know they've gotten, they're working on some LSU transfers, and they've got some of those young guys that Mickey Joseph has carried over. But I think the biggest thing that's happened in Nebraska for the wide receiver position group is when you bring in Mickey Joseph, you expect a lot of turnover in that group. You haven't had that because I think people look at his track record with Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, and many others, see that, and they're like, wow, this dude can produce people. We're not going to move on. The guys like Omar Manning, Xavier Betts, Alante Brown. I know me and you, Mark, we've talked about those guys a million times on these shows because they have the talent, but they've never gotten there. But maybe now, you bring in a coach like this and they're all bought in and staying at Nebraska. Maybe now is the time for them. So I'm extremely intrigued to see them not moving on and see what they can do in this offense. I know there's plenty of time for them to move on still, but so far so good.
Yeah, and you got to think as soon as they know, okay, we got a proven quarterback from the standpoint that he's done it one season. So he's shown in the Big 12 he can get it done. And on top of that, they keep track of, they know who the top recruits were. So they knew he had the high ceiling, but now he's proven it for a year. Again, if you look at the numbers, and I'm trying to think what games I saw. So he, of course, had a pretty amazing game against Oklahoma. Sooners came back. That was a Caleb Williams, Casey Thompson duel. It was a 28-7 Texas lead. Oklahoma came storming back to win, but threw for 388 and 5 touchdowns with no picks against Oklahoma. The Oklahoma State game, from a number standpoint, didn't look good, but we know how good Oklahoma State's defense was. They won the Fiesta Bowl this year, almost made the playoff. They had a top 5 to 10 defense in the country. I watched that game as well. Not necessarily a huge issue with him. He did have a bad pick at the end of the first half against OK State that kind of turned things around for them. Baylor, 23 of 38 for 280 and 2 touchdowns. The Kansas game, he ripped them up for 6 touchdowns on 30 of 43. And again, it was a back and forth to a certain extent, between he and Hudson Card. Finished out the season as the starter against a pretty good Kansas State team that finished 8-5, 17 of 23 for $170 in that game with a touchdown pass and a pick. All right. Appreciate everybody being here. And what I was leading to there, with guys just knowing what other guys' reputations are, it's a small world. These guys were recruited together, even across the country. Guys know reputations, and they talk, and they know, and then they get the lowdown from other players. This has to help. You would think this would help keep skill position players at Nebraska for next year.
Yeah, I believe it will. Like I said, I think the receiver room is staying intact, minus Toure. But hopefully, Mickey Joseph and these guys can develop a little bit more. And yeah, the running back room, I think it's kind of still a question mark. I know Nebraska wants to get more into that, but looking at the new offensive coordinator, Mark Whipple, and some of the things he did with Kenny Pickett, I think it's hard to sit here and say, I think a lot of fans, especially Nebraska Twitter, from what I've been reading a lot, they get into this, mindset of looking at what Kenny Pickett did, and they're like, it's going to happen with Casey Thompson. It's going to happen with whoever we get. Not exactly. Kenny Pickett's a really, really good talent, and it's hard to sit here and say it's going to happen again. But, you kind of see some of the systems he runs, and he allows the quarterback, Kenny Pickett, not the most mobile guy when he first started at Pitt, but he really came to his own, running for over 400 yards this year. And that's taking sacks off the board. They take yards off. So he was able to show his athleticism a lot more than people thought. So I think Whipple's going to him and Frost are going to have this system together where they're going to make sure that the quarterback's moving, but at the same time, finding those open reads. They love the tight end room. It's going to be great for Nebraska with Vokalek and Fadone. So I think that there's a lot of skill positions that are looking good, and I'm glad they went after some offensive linemen in the portal to kind of shore up some of their problems they've had on the offensive line. But yeah, I saw somebody's comment on here that said, how many years of eligibility does he have left? I'm pretty sure it's 2 from what I know. I know he's played 3 seasons technically at Texas, but you had the COVID year, and I'm not sure if he hit the redshirt mark in his first year playing, but I know he has 2 for sure.
Yeah, that makes sense. We could go through it, but yeah, that makes sense. Chubba Purdy, Florida State backup quarterback, backed up Mackenzie Milton, Jordan Travis, and he was a pretty good prospect as the 7th rated dual threat quarterback coming out of high school in Arizona. I got to admit, I couldn't remember whether that had gone through, that he had transferred, or we've just talked about it so many times on our shows and so forth that we had just talked about that it's pretty much considered close to a done deal. I know he's been on campus. It doesn't appear as though it's official, though, that he's determined that. Where are you on Chubba Purdy?
Yeah, from what I know, he's visiting next week. Official visit on the campus next week. Yeah, all signs point to it happening. And I think, people are a little bit worried because, they look at guys like Smothers, look at some of the young guys that have in Harburg and Torres, and they're like, if we bring in too many quarterbacks, they're going to leave. But I don't think you can look at it that way when you're looking at college football today because everybody transfers. You just have to go get numbers, and guys will leave. Even if you don't get numbers, guys will still leave. So it's better to have some security there. But, I think he's a young guy, like you mentioned, he really this year, I think at Florida State, he only threw 5 passes. He's 5 for 5 for 95 yards and 2 touchdowns against UMass. So Yeah, but he's got a lot of dual threat ability in his game. So I think it's a good young guy to bring in for competition because you don't want to just sit here and be like, oh, we're going to put all our chips in one basket with Casey Thompson. Because if he goes down and you got some upset quarterbacks behind him, it could blow up. So I think you bring in more competition, make these guys. But, I like the dual threat ability of Chubba Purdy. Not a lot of college film for him to watch. I know his first year at Florida State, he played a little bit more, but he was so young. It's hard to judge that stuff. He's probably grown up a lot in the last year and a half, but he's got a pretty good brother over there at Iowa State too. So we'll see if that works out. But yeah, I mean, from what I know, it's looking like it's gonna be something that happens next week.
Yeah, he can learn a lot from his brother. If you're not aware, Brock Purdy, Iowa State quarterback who won more games there with the Cyclones than any quarterback in Iowa State history, finished up his career against Clemson a few weeks ago and took Iowa State to a Fiesta Bowl 2 years ago. So the only thing to determine with Purdy is how to pronounce his first name. Chubba. I hear both. I have both come out of my mouth sometimes. I keep thinking that Chuba Hubbard, the running back at Oklahoma State, was Chuba, and there's an extra B with Chubba. So maybe it's Chuba. I don't know. So we'll figure it out when he actually gets to Nebraska. But yeah, I know that I already stated it, but people need to let it soak in. When you're talking seventh-rated dual threat quarterback in the country coming out of high school, he's got a lot of talent. He was highly regarded coming out of high school, and he top 200 player overall, sixth-rated player in Arizona. So he would be a great one. And Zach, what you said about stockpiling numbers is something I talk about all the time now. And I'm no mastermind when it comes to building a college football roster. But in the old days, and when I mean the old days, I mean like 2 years ago, you would have reasonably a projection as a head coach to say, okay, our starting quarterback just finished up his sophomore season. He's headed toward his junior season. Maybe he's good enough to go to the NFL after that. Probably not. So we probably have him for 2 years. We're happy with him. Oh, we just had a redshirt freshman. He's looking good. We're developing him. He'll be next in line. And you'd have it all lined up, and you could probably project your quarterback position for the next 3 or 4 years and be relatively comfortable with that, barring injuries, barring somebody tanking, but you'd have a plan. Now you can have a plan, but you better just stockpile the room and assume, okay, if we got 4 quarterbacks that are really good, 2 of them are going to leave, and we might be able to talk the backup into staying. Hopefully we can talk the backup into staying, and the starter's going to stay most likely. That's not always a guarantee either. Bo Nix leaves Auburn, and Max Johnson leaves LSU. So that's not even a guarantee, but at least stockpile as many players as you can, and and let the competition begin.
Yeah, I mean, it's so hard to you hit it right on the head right there. It's so hard to predict what's going to happen now. So you might as well just stockpile those numbers. Roll with what you got, and worst case scenario, if you have 4 guys and 3 guys leave, you can sit and look where those 3 guys go, and then when you're recruiting your next guy out of the portal, you say like, look, our guys went to Oklahoma State, went to Florida, and went to here. Like, they have a lot of talent. Those coaches saw the talent, so we're developing this talent right. They just wanted to go play. You can almost use it as a recruiting advantage in some ways. So I think that's something that people are going to see with the portal nowadays. But man, it's turning more and more into a free agency with the whole Caleb Williams thing, saying, I'm not cutting Oklahoma off yet. But then Dylan Gabriel says, yes, you are, because I'm taking your spot. So, it's just kind of a mess now, but we'll see. I mean, I've seen a lot of things with Caleb Williams to Ole Miss. I think that'd be a great connection with Kiffin. I don't think anybody can deny that at all either.
I'm watching these bowl games, specifically teams like Iowa and Minnesota, and you know where I'm headed. 1-score losses all over the place. I consider them all 9 1-score losses. The Ohio State game, technically a 2-score loss, but the game wasn't decided until 90 seconds left. And anybody with a brain watching the game sees that the game was really close. Nebraska's taken a top 4 team that close. And it was just crazy. The other thing the one thing that hit me is I'm watching Iowa, Kentucky, and I'm watching Wandale Robinson go crazy. And he had a ridiculous year, as you well know, 104 catches, caught 10 for $170 in that game. And if he's not on the field, Kentucky doesn't win. And I'm just looking at that thinking, and I know that receiver wasn't necessarily Nebraska's issue, but certainly they didn't have anybody like him. And losing all those one-score games, you just wonder if he's there, how many games would if he made a difference in a one-score game?
Yeah, I mean, you got to think he's going to make a lot of differences. I know Nebraska wanted to use him as that running back wide receiver hybrid like they did his first year. He didn't want to do that. I understand it. Who knows? He projects maybe at the next level to be a guy that's the kind of that playmaker, which you're seeing like a guy like Deebo Samuel projecting to now. But, he wanted to develop as a receiver to get his NFL draft grade higher and be a true receiver to NFL scouts. And, you watch him this year, like you said, I watched him plenty of games. Man, did he look like a receiver? Like in Nebraska, he looked like a playmaker, but you look at him at Kentucky and you're like, he's going against Riley Moss at Iowa, one of the best corners in the country, and he is just making him look bad. Even when Riley Moss is all over him, he's still making catches. So, yeah, I mean, that play at the end of the game where he got down to the one, I don't know how he makes like 7 people miss, but he did. And, yeah, he's going to be a great talent in the NFL. And, yeah, it really does make you wonder as a Nebraska fan. I think Nebraska people really didn't start tweeting about Wandale and how he was doing this year until they watched that bowl game. They watched that bowl game, and all of a sudden I saw all the tweets that were like, man, if we had Wandale, I'm like, should have been watching all year. Yeah, he was that good all year.
Yeah, the dude caught 100 passes in the SEC. He was doing it all year. Not a lot of guys do that. And then again, back to the one-score losses, and certainly Wandale Robinson is off and running and maybe in the NFL next year. He's got to make that decision known here soon. But looking at the quarterback position, because that's why we're here, and the big news, of course, as most of you are filtering in, Casey Thompson, Texas quarterback, led the Big 12 in touchdown passes this past season, has transferred to Nebraska, is that I try not to criticize college players as much as we got to evaluate them at the same time. And Adrian Martinez, I give the guy tons of credit for playing through injuries constantly. And he was a gamer and talented guy in many respects, tended to make the turnover at the wrong time and not the most accurate passer in the world. Now, college quarterbacks are going to miss throws. I say this all the time that, Zach, that we get on these chats and with all the comments that come in during the chat and to the channel, I think too many college football fans are watching Aaron Rodgers and Tom Brady on Sunday and thinking quarterbacks should throw like that. And we need to give these guys a bit of some leeway. They're going to miss some throws on Saturday, but I think a Casey Thompson is going to upgrade the position, not significantly, but it's going to be noticeable.
Yeah, and as to what you're saying, yeah, props to Adrian Martinez. I mean, the dude, as many people know, he battled more than anyone. Injuries, through everything. That guy, and, through a lack of help sometimes. It was just him out there, but he did make that big mistake. I got my Adrian Martinez jersey in the mail in November, and then he transferred. It's okay. I'll still wear it around. I think he represented the University of Nebraska football program perfectly with how he battled. He just couldn't produce the wins in the end. I mean, whether it was his fault or not, they still couldn't win, and he was still the starting quarterback. But, yeah, huge props to that guy. But I think Casey Thompson, it's definitely going to be – the talent's going to be there just like it was with Martinez. And I think a lot of people are going to look at his stats on ESPN or wherever they look and be like, oh, well, he's a pocket passer. He's not a really, runner. He only ran for 159 yards. Like, Texas didn't want to run their quarterbacks. It's kind of their system with Bijan Robinson. They'd rather just hand it off to that guy because he can do more than the quarterbacks can anyway. So, but I think the athleticism is higher than Martinez. I think when you institute this guy in an option type of offense like Nebraska has, you're going to see how athletic he is at 6'1", 190. But, yeah, I mean, the accuracy issues are still going to be there. Like you said, they're not NFL quarterbacks, but the arm talent is going to be much higher than Martinez as far as arm strength. He's going to have that. His anticipation is there. Now, sometimes his anticipation is wrong, and there's a guy that's baiting him into throwing it and picks it. But that anticipation is something that makes you an elite college quarterback. I mean, you have to have it because you can't just throw it to open receivers. You have to throw receivers open. And I think that's something that they like in Casey Thompson. So I love it from an athlete standpoint and from a quarterback standpoint. Just the development over the offseason is going to be crucial, but the talent's definitely there.
Derek in the chat, thanks for letting us know that Wandale Robinson has declared for the NFL draft. He did that just about a day ago. And there you go. So we got Zach Reeder here from Fifth Quarter College Football. So it's fifthquarter.net. Catch his work and everybody else there at Fifth Quarter. We appreciate Zach being here. He helped anchor our Nebraska football coverage post-game this past year. I don't have anything else. I did want to hit you up on if there was anything else going on in the off season that you're looking forward to. Since we haven't talked to you, Zach, did you have any initial thoughts about the recruiting class that just came in on December 15th?
No, I think it was pretty good. I think it was pretty light for Nebraska. I think some people worried about the numbers, but I think the numbers were low because they didn't have a lot leave, and they didn't have a ton go to the transfer portal. I think that that's a big thing with Nebraska right now is go look at the transfer portal numbers for the Huskers. They did not have a lot enter. I think the culture, I think that's a testament to the culture they're building there, and I think that these guys are buying into the system. Hopefully that means they don't lose 9 one-score games this year, and hopefully they can win some of those. But, I think it's going to be – I think things are looking up. And I think the recruiting class, from a development standpoint, there wasn't a ton of high recruits. If you go look at the rankings, you'll see they're down there and be like, oh, great. They just couldn't have a big class. They just did not lose a ton. They lost a lot of big-time players, but not a ton of numbers. So – hopefully the development's good, and I really like where the coaching staff's going to be at. It was a big loss to lose the D-line coach, but I think they're going to replace him, and I think everything will be good there. But as far as everything else, I think Nebraska fans should be happy about what they've done in the portal, going and getting an Oklahoma State transfer, offensive lineman, some other offensive linemen, getting a big-time punter from the FCS level at Montana, and then getting another kicker. So I think that, whether we don't appreciate those or not, we saw as Nebraska fans this year, they lost several games because of that special team stuff. So hopefully that turns around now that they made an emphasis on that. And I'm super excited to see where, Nebraska goes, but it's all about development now. And we'll see what Mickey Joseph can do with those receivers. I know people are pumped up to see that. So I'm thrilled by that as much as anything.
Yeah, that kicker hit something like 20 or 23, something like that, if I remember right, from when that news came down. Anything you'd like to see? I know you touched upon it quite a bit, so it sounds like you're looking for more offensive linemen in the transfer portal, and a running back would be nice.
Yeah, I mean, it would be nice to have a running back because right now you just look at the roster and you saw Ramir produce a little bit last year, but there's just not a lot of production. It's just kind of a big question mark, and we know how those things go in college football today because the last thing you want is to put all the pressure on Casey Thompson right when he comes in because they don't have a running game. So maybe look in the transfer portal. I know there's plenty of running backs, but, offensive line, I think they've got a few, but, you never can have too many big guys up front, especially with injuries and how everything works out. But, yeah, I'm really thrilled. Whipple, Joseph, I thought those were 2 home run hires by Frost, and I think it showed that, he gave up some of his salary, is technically on that 1-year type of deal now, or it's prove it, and I think he gave some of those money to some big-time assistants and said, we need this to progress our football program and not be a 4-8, 3-9 team.
Zach Reeder, Fifth Quarter College Football. Join him and the rest of the staff right there talking college football. Zach, we appreciate you stopping by. Obviously, this news just broke in the last 45 minutes. Wanted to jump on here and talk to everybody and break it down. So appreciate you stopping by.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. GBR.